What is going on, everybody? In today's video, we are hopping into a full PPR 12 team mock draft for the 2024 fantasy football season. I will be running these all through the remainder of the month of July, leading into the month of August. Today, we're starting right at the 1.1. We will be going through every single position as the next month or so continues to go on. And this is a mock draft with our subscriber base. Real people in this draft, no auto drafters, no computer drafting. It's going to be a good look for you guys, a real competitive mock draft. And we are running these during our live streams throughout the rest of the offseason as well as our underdog drafts. So if you guys are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe down below so you guys can see all of the different mock drafts and regular real drafts that we've been doing here at the channel to help you guys get prepared for the 2024 fantasy football season. But let's not waste any more time. Let's hop into today's video where I will break down round by round my strategy for the 1.1 and the players I'm picking, why I'm picking them, everything that you guys need to see. Let's get into a mock draft. All right, so at the 1.1, really regardless of if you're in a half PPR format or a full PPR format, I'm going to take Christian McCaffrey off the board. I'm okay. Like, there's a place if you're playing in a lot of leagues, if you want to go with CeeDee Lamb, maybe Tyreek Hill there at the 1.1, if you prefer a wide receiver, there is a place and time to have some of those builds this year, especially in best ball tournaments. But for me, 95% of the time this year, I'm going to be taking Christian McCaffrey off of the board, really regardless of if you're in a standard half PPR or full PPR format. And just so you guys are aware, for today's video, we are hopping into a one quarterback, two running back, two wide receiver, one tight end. Then we practice for two flex formats. But even if you guys are in a one flex format, this video is still going to be very helpful. This mock draft is still going to be very helpful for you guys to see where players are going. And then we have 5 bench spots here as well. So like I said, we've done, at this point, dozens of these on the channel so far this off season. And the first round is going to be pretty much almost identical. Maybe not, each exact position, but for the most part, the players are going to be identical. Okay. You're going to see kind of that top tier, the first 3 players off the board, CMC, Lamb, and Hill. Right now, you're really not going to see that change in a majority of mock drafts. Every now and then, somebody might prefer a different wide receiver, but 99% of mock drafts, it's C-Mac, Lamb, Hill off the board to start. Then for the remainder of the first round, some combination of the players you see on the board right now. Justin Jefferson, Brees Hall, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase, and Bijan Robinson, okay? I mean, I've seen Bijan go as early as the 1-4. I've seen him go like he goes in today's mock at the 1-9. I've seen A.J. Brown go at the 1-4. I've seen Amon-Ra. I mean, I've seen all these guys all over the place. And then after that, after the 1.9 is gone, you're going to see Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua. And then at the 112, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, Marvin Harrison Jr. are going to be the players that if they don't go with the 112, they are going to go at the top of the second round. And the second round is a little bit up and down. And there goes Devontae Adams. So a little bit of a surprise selection. And every now and then, especially if you guys are doing best ball drafts, you will see the 2.1 be a player who maybe you don't expect, because whoever's drafting there at the 1.12 knows that whoever they select at the 2.1, or I should say who they don't select, is not going to be there at the 3.12. So they have to go ahead and secure whoever they want. And for today's draft, it is Devontae Adams. So for me, looking forward to this draft at the 1.1, which, some people look at the 1.1 and kind of on a yearly basis don't necessarily like it, because you miss out on that, top tier second round selection player who is honestly, arguably, almost just as valuable as a first round player, right? I mean, look at Barkley, Gibbs, Marvin Harrison Jr. there, some other names like Brandon Ayuk, Kyren Williams, Drake London still available, Chris Olave. And some of these guys you can definitely argue are just as valuable as players going at the 1.12. And if not, they're just a tier below, right? So I understand that, but really, I think this year I actually feel pretty good drafting from the 1.1. And I'll tell you guys right now, every now and then you might see Barkley fall out to the 212. I mean, Derrick Henry is available there a lot of the times. There is a place to consider a double hero running back build. Once again, especially in best ball formats. But for me, in a full PPR redraft format, which is what we are practicing for today, I'm going to go back to back wide receiver there, especially in full PPR formats, and especially if you're practicing for a double flex format, which has become so much more popular, right? So for me, it's really, there's no pressure here at the 212 and the 3.1. I'm just going to take the top two best available wide receivers. And, quite admittedly, I don't see Chris Olave in this range a lot, but I'll take Olave all day long right there. And I'll go Mike Evans. But if you prefer maybe DJ Moore, Debo Samuel, I do really like Jalen Waddle right there. Any of those players are fine. Just take the two best available wide receivers. And I do think there's a strong argument for Jalen Waddle maybe over Mike Evans there. I don't know if I'm going to say over Chris Olave, but either way, we get two stud wide receiver ones. We fill that wide receiver one spot and that wide receiver two spot, and we just move along. So, looking ahead to the 4.12, right, there's going to be a lot of players taken off the board before we select again, obviously. So, the best thing to do right here is just not panic, but kind of sit back and think about what you do want to do at the 4, 12, and 5.1. So for me, in a double flex format, full PPR, I'm going to snag at least one more wide receiver with those two selections. And then it's just going to kind of depend what running backs are available there. I will say at the 1.1, you are kind of in a position where majority of the time I'm not going to go tight end too early. Probably not going to end up with one of those studs. You kind of have to reach slightly for Sam Laporta if you want him. You'd have to take him at the 212 or the 3.1. And Travis Kelsey, and in terms of ADP, once again, you'd have to reach, right? It just doesn't necessarily make sense. And then players like Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, based on the room that you're drafting with, you might see some of these guys go there, but overall they probably won't be available. And I just think it makes more sense to kind of stack up at running back and wide receiver, because I mean, although I do like drafting from the 1.1 this year, you are at a slight disadvantage when it comes to those positional or skill positional players. So for me, like I said, looking ahead to the 412 5.1, probably just going to go ahead and select the best available wide receiver and the best available running back, but we'll see who's available there. Now, I do want to say, right, at the 1.1, you're going hero running back, in my opinion, right? You're taking Christian McCaffrey, and that is your quote unquote hero running back, anchor running back, however you want to look at it. And you might also be in a position where at the 412, 5.1, you don't have to take an RB2. And with that being said, I think a lot of people are kind of nervous uh, about late round running backs this year, and kind of think like you have to hammer out running back early. And for me, I actually think there is a lot of good value at the running back position later in drafts, especially if Christian McCaffrey is your RB1, if Brees Hall is your RB1, if Bijan Robinson is your RB1, and even if JT Gibbs or Barkley are your running back ones. And there are some other guys like Kyron Williams, Derrick Henry, Isaiah Pacheco, James Cook that I feel pretty good about this year. And they might require maybe a stronger RB2, but still, I think if you go hero running back, don't panic. I really think there are some good late round running backs, which we will discuss throughout this video as well. So sitting back here, kind of light at tight end so far. Like I said, I mean, we expected Laporta to be gone, expected Kelsey to be gone, and Josh Allen, the first quarterback off the board. Now, I will say at the 412 5.1, you are going to be in position to probably take an elite quarterback if you want to. But me personally, the way I draft in a redraft format, I'm not going to take an elite quarterback at that spot. For me, really, when it comes to the tight end position, I am eyeing a player of like of like Jake Ferguson as caliber, maybe a guy that goes a little bit earlier, like a Evan Ingram. And if I don't get one of those guys at the right value, then I'm going to hold off and go kind of double late round tight end, get a Dalton Schultz and a Cole Kmet, Dalton Schultz and a Luke Musgrave, some combination like that, maybe Dallas Goddard and Dalton Schultz, and just call it a day. And the same thing kind of applies for the quarterback position, which we'll break down in just a second here. So, top available players at the wide receiver position, there are a lot of names that I like here. Okay. Plenty of running backs here. Guys I like: Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, James Conner, David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift. Plenty of good names. But I want to go back to back wide receiver here. Okay. George Pickens, T. Higgins, both perfectly fine here. We will go with T. Higgins. I'm okay with Christian Kirk. And this might surprise some of you guys, but I'm going to go against Sleeper's ADP. And I'm going to take Hollywood Brown here. This is a player in underdog drafts, right? In best ball formats, whose ADP aligns with the 5.1, with the beginning of the 5th round. And a player that I am drafting a lot in best ball tournaments. But I also am drafting him a lot against ADP in redraft mock drafts as well. And I do believe as the offseason goes on, he's going to rise up in ADP. And, I like Rashee Rice as well. I'm not personally worried about the Rashee Rice suspension at his given ADP. If he's a wide receiver 4 or 5 on your roster, I am okay with that. I don't think he's going to miss a massive amount of time. And I understand, liking Xavier Worthy as well at his ADP. But for me to start this season, Hollywood Brown is going to be that guy for Patrick Mahomes. And I think as the season goes on, even when Rashee Rice comes back from, the suspension that we're assuming he's going to get, that's only going to help Hollywood Brown. It's going to be more difficult for defenses to line up against him. So I'm a fan of Hollywood Brown in the flex. I think he brings a tremendous amount of upside, and getting him as a wide receiver 4, I think, quite frankly, this might be one of the best Patrick Mahomes offenses we ever see. Might be one of the best Chiefs offensive seasons under Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes that we ever see. Call me crazy, but I really think when you look on paper, this offense is due for a huge season. So I'm all over Hollywood Brown. I'm okay with drafting him against ADP. I think come middle of August, this ADP is going to be different on Sleeper because, like I said, in underdog drafts, which are, in my opinion, the most competitive drafts hands down this time of year, Hollywood Brown is going in the 5th round easily. So let's move along. There's my rant about Hollywood Brown. At the 412, I went T. Higgins, right? I'm okay with Christian Kirk there. I'm okay with George Pickens there. I do like Chris Godwin, who's the only other wide receiver off the board. There goes Terry McLaurin. I think those guys are okay, but I would rather have Kirk, Higgins. And then if you kind of want, kind of like a boomer bust upside type selection who's not Hollywood Brown, I think George Pickens is okay too. But we did go tight end there. You are in position, once again, similar to quarterback, which we still need to kind of talk about. But if you did go tight end there, at least in this draft, you did have a couple options, whether it's Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, or Dalton Kincaid, or some people are in drafts. I'm seeing people reach for Kyle Pitts. They really want to get a piece of that Atlanta Falcons offense, really believe in Kyle Pitts having a quote unquote breakout season this year. So whoever you prefer there could be okay. But the way I'm drafting, like I said, I'm going tight end a bit later and I'm going quarterback a bit later. So let's break that down because, like I said, at the 412, 5.1, you're in position to take a Lamar Jackson, a Patrick Mahomes, a CJ Stroud, definitely. And in some drafts, you might be in position to take Jalen Hurts, who went one spot before the 4.12 in tonight's mock. So for me personally, there's going to be some players much later in drafts, okay, who are going to be top 10 fantasy quarterbacks easily, okay? You're going to see some teams take 2 quarterbacks. That's going to impact things. There's only 12 teams in mock drafts. I am just traditionally a late round quarterback drafter as well as a late round tight end drafter, but I will definitely draft a quarterback later than the tight end position. I mean, you look at guys like Kyler Murray, his ADP is 82.7. Dak Prescott's ADP is 75. Burrow's ADP is 65.3, but he falls back sometimes. Some people are still really shaky about Joe Burrow. Jordan Love's at 85.4 in terms of ADP, and that's like if you miss out on that tier, Purdy's ADP is 101.9, Tua's 107.8, Jared Goff's 112.7. You got kind of like an upside pick in Jaden Daniels at 115.2. And then if all else fails, you don't get any of those guys, you got a new tier: Herbert, Lawrence, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, all going very late. And if you absolutely need to, although I don't prefer it, you can go with a double quarterback build in a single quarterback redraft format if you have to. So, nonetheless, our priority going with a hero running back team here while we are set, obviously, at RB1, wide receiver one, wide receiver two, and both flex positions. We have to hammer out the running back position here at 6.12 and 7.1. So, really, regardless of who's on the board, we're just going to knock out the running back position back to back, get our RB2, and then get a bench running back as well, which will be our first bench player. And going back to the 4.12, they are selecting T. Higgins. So I know some people are shaky on T. Higgins. That's why he's going later in drafts. And if you don't feel good about him, that's fine. But I personally, believe, like, I mean, all the reports out there indicate that T. Higgins is going to play on the franchise tag this season. Like, we're not seeing kind of um, the same atmosphere around T. Higgins that we're seeing around Brandon Ayuk at the time that I'm recording this, where Ayuk might hold out. He's requesting a trade. Higgins isn't necessarily going that route, and it looks like he's going to play with the Bengals. So I think he's a really good value. But maybe if you prefer someone, quote unquote, a little bit more stable, as Higgins did miss some time, that's okay. But I just think he's a really good value. To take him as a wide receiver three, I think is too good to pass up. So I'll take him all day long at the 4.12. So I was hoping DeAndre Swift would kind of quote unquote fall here, but he does not. So I'll take Zamir White all day long in this position. And then you just kind of have to look at it like, do you prefer Najee Harris? Do you prefer Tony Pollard, Javonte Williams? Some people like maybe Nick Chubb in this range, who I don't feel as good about. Um, and, admittedly, I don't really prefer Najee Harris or Tony Pollard. So I'll just take Najee off the board. But I think it has to be Najee or Tony Pollard right there. Once again, this is our RB3. We're hoping they're on the bench. I do feel fine about Zamir White. But you guys let me know in the comments down below, who would you draft there as your RB3, Najee Harris or Tony Pollard? I think in most of my drafts this year, I probably have drafted Tony Pollard just because there's like theoretically more upside there. But these are both split backfields, right? Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, and then Tajee Spears, Tony Pollard, and maybe not the most exciting offenses, but we'll see what happens. It's okay. So the guys that I do prefer in that range, if I go anchor running back or hero running back, whatever you want to call it, David Montgomery, Raheem Mostert, and DeAndre Swift. If they fall out there, then I prefer them hands down as my RB2. Put out a video this past week. 5 running backs you need to draft right now, and all 3 guys made that list: Monty, Mostert, and Swift. They are gone in today's draft. That is okay. Zamir White, I don't think I really need to explain the Zamir White pick, right? Like, I'm happy with Zamir White as an RB2, but love him as an RB3. But I think enough people kind of understand the Raiders are going to run the football a ton this year, right? And Zamir White is the guy. Okay, if you look back at what they did last season in terms of the running back position, they will run the football down opponents' throats. They will run their RB1 into the ground. Zamir White's going to be that guy as long as he stays healthy. The touches are there for him. He's another player in that kind of range that I think is a great value selection. So let's just say, for argument's sake, over T. Higgins or Hollywood Brown, let's say we went Kamara or Ramondre Stevenson, who those would be the 2 running backs that I would go there if I didn't go Higgins or Hollywood Brown, one or the other, because I'd still take at least one of those wide receivers. Then we take Zamir White at the 6-12, and then we take a wide receiver here in the 7th round. Rashee Rice is available. Brian Thomas Jr., Roma Dunze, JSN are there. Xavier Worthy's here. Ladd McConkey. So Christian Watson is falling back a bit in this draft. He won't be available at the 8.12, but there's still plenty of names there that I think are perfectly fine for a wide receiver 4. So if you're looking at this draft and kind of saying, well, I don't like the RB2 position here, maybe not enough upside for you, I don't necessarily prefer maybe Higgins or Hollywood Brown. Just kind of make a side note, right? You could go with Stevenson or Kamara at the 412 or 5-1, take one of those wide receivers, and then take Zamir White at the 612 and at the 7.1. There's still plenty of good wide receivers on the board. I'm okay with JSN. If you want to take one of those rookie wide receivers, so be it. But for me, it's probably Christian Watson. I just think the upside is far too much to pass on. When I'm looking at wide receiver 3 and 4s, wide receiver 5s and 6 on my roster, I'm looking for pure upside. I think that's what Christian Watson brings to the table, even with the injury history. If you want to go Rashee Rice, that's probably my next favorite player there. I know he's probably going to miss some time, but we also don't know that for sure. It might be next season that he ends up getting the suspension. And regardless, I don't think it's going to be a very lengthy suspension. I think at his current ADP, he's worth the risk because when he does come back, he's still going to get plenty of targets and an offense that I already gave praise to in this video with Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. So moving along, let's look at 8.12 and 9.1. Plenty of good quarterbacks still available. Okay. CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray are all there. I'm not panicking about quarterback just yet. I will go ahead and take another running back here. Okay. For sure. I don't think we have to take a wide receiver. But I am a fan of Jamison Williams this season, especially as like a wide receiver 5. So we could consider him. But I think the best thing to do is to get our tight end 1, especially if Jake Ferguson's here. One of my favorite tight ends to target, especially in this range. And he's gone, which usually happens once I start talking about a player. So we can kind of either target our first tight end, whether it's Brock Bowers or Dallas Goedert, or we can see who potentially comes back to us at the 10.12. As of right now, if I'm looking at things correctly, every team except for the 1.3 and my team has a tight end or 2 tight ends. So I don't think we need to panic too much. And like I said, quarterbacks, we could take a good value quarterback here. Stroud is really hard for me to ignore right here. But I think if Jameson Williams is here, I'll go ahead and take him off the board. I love him as a wide receiver 5. I've talked about him plenty this offseason and why I like him. But I do think we have to take another running back. And part of me kind of feels like we could go with 2 running backs here. But there goes Austin Eckler, who I'm actually pretty high on. So let's take Gus Edwards, who's going to be the RB1. I don't care what anyone says for the Chargers. And then there are some other running backs that I really like here. Let's take Brian Robinson. And that is a little deep at running back. I usually come out of these drafts with 4 running backs, but this kind of gives us the full security at the RB2 position. Okay. We lead with Christian McCaffrey. We have 2 stud wide receivers in Olave and Evans who can start at wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2, no matter what. We have 2 viable flex options who give us upside in Higgins and Brown. And now we also have running backs on the bench who can fill in at the flex position if we need them to. But also, we're going to be able to rotate that RB2 behind Christian McCaffrey no matter what. Okay. And in redraft, you always got to think if you're kind of loaded up at a position, trades are going to come into play as the season goes on as well. So once again, if you want to go with a quarterback over Edwards or Robinson there, one or the other, I think that's okay because there are really good quarterbacks available on the board in CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson, as well as Joe Burrow, who in a lot of mock drafts might not be there at this point in time. But we've been doing mock drafts on the channel every single week, and I have seen a lot of mocks this year where people are a little bit more willing to let quarterback fall back a couple rounds. Come middle of August, when it's really getting time, for people to actually start drafting and leading into the beginning of September, I don't quite know that is going to happen. So we'll talk about that then. But we're in the middle of July, and we'll just kind of look at the board as is. But quarterback, I'm just not going to worry about in this mock quite yet. And if you want to go with an additional wide receiver there, whether you like Jamison Williams, Tyler Lockett, Romeo Dobbs, maybe like a guy like Jacoby Myers or Khalil Shakir. Some people like Josh Palmer in this range. For some people, it might be too early. Shaheed's off the board there. in this kind of range of the draft, when you're drafting for your bench wide receivers or potential flex wide receivers, you don't have to worry about ADP, in my opinion. Take the guys that you like and that you feel like give your roster the most upside or just the best overall potential to win matchups on a week to week basis. So if you want to take one of those guys, I'm fine with it. But let's talk about Gus Edwards, who I think is clearly locked in as the RB1 for the Chargers, which we know is going to be a run heavy, run first offense. I think he's an absolute steal, especially at the end of the eighth round. And I like Vidal. I get that J.K. Dobbins is on the roster at the moment, but for me, all signs point towards Gus Edwards as being the clear RB1. And even if they utilize more than one running back, in my opinion, Gus Edwards is going to get the goal line touches. As long as he's healthy, he's going to have a good fantasy season, especially as your RB4. He had 13 rushing touchdowns last year. Different offense, different teams. The Ravens were one of the best offenses in the NFL. I get that. But Gus the Bus, I think, especially as an RB4, absolute steal. Brian Robinson Jr. I mean, there are other running backs who we saw go in the ninth round that I like. Blake Corum, I'm high on Jerome Ford. I think Tajay Spears is okay. Chubb makes me a little bit nervous, but enough people like him. I understand it. And Singletary, once again, is RB1 for the Giants. That doesn't look like it's going to change. So I get that too. But Brian Robinson Jr. Had some very good finishes last year and was on a really good pace, was a top 10 running back before he got injured and missed 2 games at the end of the season. And I think that the Washington Commanders offense is going to be improved this season. So if you're getting him as an RB5, I think that's fine. And quite frankly, if you get Austin Eckler, who still scored 6 times last year, only played in 14 games, and still had 1,000 yards from scrimmage and gave you double-digit fantasy points in full PPR in 8 out of the 14 games he played in, as an RB5, I'll take a chance, quite admittedly, on either of those Washington Commanders running backs. All right, so moving ahead here into the middle of the 10th round. Still a lot of quarterback value here, still a lot of tight end value. We are kind of in the position to finish this draft. We have an exact game plan. We have 4 more selections, okay? So we're going to take a quarterback, we're going to take a tight end, and we're going to take 2 wide receivers. Now, if we get in a position maybe where tight end kind of stacks up against us, then we can take 2 tight ends and replace one of those wide receivers since we already have 4 stud wide receivers. But generally, in a full PPR double flex format, I'm going to want to come out of my draft with 6 wide receivers. Now, if you're playing in a single flex format, not as big of a deal for me. 5 wide receivers is okay. And that's why generally I go with 4 running backs, especially if I have a stud like Christian McCaffrey, because what that allows me to do, right, is to draft 6 wide receivers, 4 running backs, a quarterback, and then if I need to, I can take a second quarterback or a second tight end behind the first tight end that I draft as well. So we'll just kind of sit back here and see who gets selected. We are starting to see a couple teams go double quarterback, go double tight end, and we run plenty of these mock drafts live with our very large subscriber base. And at the end of the day, you will see people take 2 quarterbacks and take 2 tight ends, even if they have stud players. So let's take Dalton Schultz as our tight end 1, which I'm okay with. And then, we just miss out on the tier of quarterback that I like here. So Kyler, Richardson, Burrow, Prescott, Love, all gone. So for me, there's kind of 2 decisions here. Do we take another wide receiver? Do we take a second tight end? For me, I'm just going to go ahead and take Brock Purdy off the board, secure a QB1, and we'll move along with this draft, drafting 2 wide receivers to end things. And we'll kind of talk about identifying late round wide receivers who bring the most upside, who you think are going to bring the best overall value to your team. All right, so for me, we're just sitting back here, very easy selections. I'm going to go ahead and look at like an ADP of 143 or later, and we'll kind of see if anyone falls out, and if players don't, then I'm okay with it. But I'm going to start with rookie Troy Franklin, who I think could end up just being someone who gets a lot of targets from rookie quarterback Bo Nix if Nix does end up being the starter, which I believe for a majority of the season, he'll end up being the starter, even though I know there are other quarterbacks on this team like Jared Stidham and Zach Wilson, but I think eventually they want Bo Nix out there. So I like Jahan Dotson. I know he had an awful sophomore season, but I think the upside's still there. I think Brandon Cooks is worth drafting. He showed enough in that Cowboys offense last year that he's fine as, wide receiver 5 or 6, right? Ricky Pearsall, I know he is currently on the non-football injury list, which was kind of a surprise, but everything going on with the Brandon Ayuk situation, although I do truly believe that at the end of the day, the Niners are going to do whatever they can to keep Brandon Ayuk on the team. I know that sounds crazy because they don't necessarily want to pay him what he's worth, but I think Ayuk has a strong chance of staying there, which I know some people disagree with, but I still like Pearsall either way. But if Ayuk's not there, then that's even better, right? But other names looking forward, I like Demario Douglas, Darnell Mooney, Malachi Corley, Jermaine Burton, Rashad Bateman's okay, Randall Robinson's okay, and the player that I draft as my final selection almost every single redraft mock draft that I do is Demarcus Robinson of the Rams, who is a player that I think he's literally my most drafted player in Underdog Fantasy right now, which is just because he's a later round pick that I think makes a great wide receiver 5 or 6, especially a great wide receiver 6 on your team. When you look at what he did at the end of the season with the Rams, it was fantastic. He got re-signed by the Rams, obviously. If you look at weeks 13 through 17, he had double-digit PPR performances in every single one of those games, 4 touchdowns through that 5-game stretch. Overall, I just think Demarcus Robinson in a fully healthy season, a season where he's fully utilized with the Rams, even if he's the wide receiver 3, he's in a great position to be a consistent, fantasy piece moving in to 2024. And, if something happens to Kupp or Puka Nakua, he's right in line to be the wide receiver 2 for the Rams. So just a tremendous value that you can take at the end of your drafts, whether you're playing in a best ball format, he still goes. I think his ADP on Underdog is like 169 at the time that I'm recording this. But it has moved up and down throughout the offseason, or really it's moved up throughout the offseason. And then right now in sleeper mock drafts, like he's either going undrafted or he's going in like the 14th, 13th round. So definitely a player that you can take and not really have to spend any draft capital on him, right? And I like him kind of over some of the other names that you see in the later rounds as well. So this is going to be pretty easy. We're just going to take 2 wide receivers and end this draft. And a majority of the guys that I named, so Brandon Cook's really the only wide receiver gone out of the players that I just kind of threw up on the queue there. So really just look at this list and take whoever you think are the best available players, right? So I'll go Jahan Dotson, and I think there's a very strong case for Ricky Pearsall here, especially because we have Brock Purdy on this team at quarterback, but I'll just go ahead and take Demarcus Robinson. I'm okay with that. But Troy Franklin, Ricky Pearsall, Demario Douglas, Mooney, Malachi Corley, Jermaine Burton, Rashad Bateman, Randall Robinson, plenty of good names here. So that concludes the team for us. So we can take a look here, looking at how things wrapped up here. I'm pretty happy with this team. Okay. We didn't really talk about Dalton Schultz at the tight end position, but I'm more than okay with Dalton Schultz as my tight end 1. Stefon Diggs is now on this team. We have 3 stud pass catchers at the wide receiver position between Collins, Dell, and Diggs on this team. Joe Mixon's there. Might end up vulturing some touchdowns from some of these receiving threats, but I still think that Dalton Schultz is really being overlooked. I think just overall, this Texans offense is going to be one of the best offenses in the league. He's going to get plenty of targets. I'm all for Dalton Schultz. If you punt the tight end position, I think he's perfectly fine. So we got Purdy at quarterback, Dalton Schultz at tight end. And for me, majority of the time, I know we talked a little bit about going either 2 quarterback or 2 tight end if you feel like you need to, but I think that's okay. But a majority of the time in a redraft 1 quarterback format, I just want to come out of my draft with 1 quarterback, 1 tight end, load up at the best potential running backs and wide receivers because those are going to be the players in my opinion, throughout the fantasy season that hold the most merit. So we've got C-Mac at running back. We've got Zamir White as our RB2. Then we've got a nice little bench of running backs. Okay, I don't really love Najee Harris. Like I said, I prefer DeAndre Swift, Raheem Mostert, David Montgomery, even James Conner. Uh, you don't really see Connor and Jones fall as commonly there, and Monty is a little bit more difficult to get at the 6-12, but you will see Mostert or Swift fall back sometimes in drafts. But Najee Harris, Tony Pollard were, they were both the guys there. It's fine as our RB3, but Gus Edwards and Brian Robinson being our RB4 and 5, I think really made up for that. So I'm okay with that. Then we get, a very good wide receiver room. Chris Olave, Mike Evans, T. Higgins, Hollywood Brown, Jahan Dotson, and Demarcus Robinson. And once again, those two final wide receiver positions, you just want the most potential upside possible. So there are a lot of other names of wide receiver that I think were okay, but Dotson in his third season, a Cliff Kingsbury offense, a new quarterback, and Jaden Daniels. Overall, I do think he has or is in position to get closer to what he did in his rookie season. I still think he's a good value pick. Demarcus Robinson, we just talked about. I really like him as a wide receiver 6. So wide receivers look great. We have a solid quarterback, a solid tight end, and we have a very good running back room. So if you're going hero running back from the 1.1, if you're taking Christian McCaffrey, like I said, still plenty of good value running backs later on. We ended up with a very good wide receiver room. And I'll go over that one note again. If you don't prefer Higgins and Brown here, and you want to take a different RB2, we could have gone Ramondre Stevenson, Alvin Kamara right there as our RB2 over Higgins or Brown. And then at the 6-12, we can still go Zamir White. And then at the 7.1 over Najee Harris, we could go JSN, Rome Odunze, Brian Thomas, Ladd McConkey, Christian Watson, Rashee Rice, whoever you prefer as your wide receiver 4. And I think that is perfectly fine, because especially if we would have still ended up getting Gus Edwards and Brian Robinson on this team. So definitely another way to look at this draft. But overall, I think either way, we would have ended up with a very good roster. So let me know in the comments down below what you guys thought about today's mock from the 1.1. And look out for our next video, which will be from the 1.2. If you guys absolutely hate this roster, we mock draft all the time on this channel. I throw together all kinds of different teams, and I throw together all kinds of different underdog teams as well. So we have thrown together dozens of fantasy football teams, real fantasy football teams, and dozens of mock draft teams so far throughout the offseason. So check out what we have on the channel if you guys didn't 100% like what you saw today, but I think we did just fine. If you guys are new to the channel and you enjoyed the content, this is all we do here all year long. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. Be sure to subscribe down below if you guys enjoyed it. And other than that, I will say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.